As we begin, know that this conversation is just focused on how we scale FDA-approved psychedelic care responsibly. And we have some of the best folks to have that conversation with who are really doing the heart of this work. So, perhaps let's just start with some brief introductions. Maybe, Jonathan, we can start with you and just share a little bit about how you got into this work, what you do, and maybe how you're related to FDA-approved.
Of course. Thank you for that intro, and thank you all for coming here today. It's really exciting. It's exciting to be with all of you. I'm Jonathan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Journey Clinical. Very brief background on myself. I spent 20 years in finance, built 2 companies, had a burnout. Turns out I was saved by psychedelics, changed my career, studied psychotherapy at the age of 38. And as I was going through that process, I really felt the need to integrate my background as an entrepreneur to scale these medicines responsibly to the millions of people that need them. And so about 5 years ago now, we founded Journey Clinical. And at a very high level, we essentially empower therapists to leverage psychedelics and interventional psychiatry to help cure anxiety and depression. We found that decentralized networks of therapy practices were the best way to go because they already have a relationship with their patients, they're embedded in local communities, and the therapeutic alliance they have is really the safest container to do so. And so what we've built is the infrastructure for delivering a gold standard of care. We provide them with a whole medical infrastructure. We are the doctor, and we support them, so they're basically getting a world-class hospital as their in-house doctor. We take on the medical part, they take on the therapy. We train them, we give them experiential and didactic learning, we give them community. Recently, we've started accepting insurance, so we're actually in contract with most major payers. It's 12 of the 25 states that we're in, and we do collaborate with drug developers, and today we are actually the largest provider of psychedelic therapy in the world.
All right, over to you.
Yeah, so my name is Jeff Grammer. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Greenbrook Wellness Centers. My background, I did my training in internal medicine and psychiatry, and then I subspecialized in geriatrics and neuropsychiatry. I served for 25 years in the Army, did 3 deployments overseas, retired in 2017 as the ranking colonel, and moved over into the CMO role. Greenbrook has 94 centers around the country, and our specialty is in treatment-resistant depression, which covers 4 million, give or take, people across the U.S. It's a huge group of people. And our whole mantra is basically getting those modalities that are otherwise out of reach to the patients that need it by overcoming barriers of awareness, geographic proximity, and fiscal viability. On any given day, we perform 500 Spravato treatments and over 800 TMS treatments. And we've been working with Compass Pathways to begin to stage ourselves so, should compounds get FDA cleared or approved, that we are in a position then to immediately offer that to patients, because it will do no one any favors if we have a compound that is available on the market, but no one can access it. So that's what we're trying to solve.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve.
And last and least, I'm Steve Levine. I'm a psychiatrist, and I'm Chief Patient Officer for Compass Pathways. And I think all are at least at this point familiar, but Compass Pathways is a biotechnology company that is developing a synthetic form of psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression and other mental health conditions with great unmet need. I spent my career working to try to create access for more innovative treatments in psychiatry. That started in the beginning of my career with some early models of collaborative care, and then in 2010 founded a company that operated around the US that initially focused on building new models of care delivery to deliver ketamine, and then ultimately, and particularly post the approval of Spravato in 2019, a broader interventional psychiatry platform. Today with Compass, where I've been for the past 5 years, I'm largely focused on looking ahead to a potential environment where we have an approved product and working with collaborators like Greenbrook and Journey Clinical, and I have the pleasure of working with this whole row on a daily basis, making sure, as has already been stated, that should we have new options available to those who are underserved and waiting for new treatments, that they're able to be implemented within the existing healthcare system. And most importantly, with everything we are doing today and planning for in the future, that we keep patients, also known as people, at the center of all of that.
Great openers. Wonderful. Well, let's start maybe with talking a little bit about the moment that we're in today, because FDA approvals were a big conversation last year, and I'd really like to talk about where we are in 2025 specifically. And so there's public support for FDA-approved fast-tracking psychedelic treatments. What signals have you seen this year that have really made you realize that the future of this work is happening right now? Maybe, Steve, can we work backwards? Start from you this time?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, first, I think it's encouraging that there are now multiple companies that are in late-stage development. And the history of drug development would say that not all of them will wind up having approved products, but there are multiple companies that have breakthrough therapy designation, and it's 5 now, multiple that are in phase 3 studies. We are about to read out the first phase 3 data for a classical psychedelic any day now, before the end of this month. And yes, there's certainly been statements by leadership in Health and Human Services and FDA that suggest that there is support. It's unclear exactly what that will look like at this point, and so our base case assumption are the typical pathway of needing 2 well-controlled pivotal trials. But we, of course, are, as part of having breakthrough therapy designation, in robust dialogue with FDA and other regulators, and are very encouraged that making progress and hope to soon have new options.
Yeah, so, it's interesting, the group that was up here before us was talking about how mental health is undergoing sort of a paradigm shift, and I agree with that. For 70 years, we sort of had like a hammer in our antidepressants and everything had to look like a nail, and unfortunately that left a lot of people in the dust. And so it's been great to have technologies like transcranial magnetic stimulation and Spravato or ketamine to help these patients that otherwise don't get the relief that they need. But still, that is not enough. And if we just take treatment-resistant depression, it is a heterogeneous disease, meaning there's probably multiple causes. We don't have the technology yet to say, well, this is why you're depressed, and therefore this is the appropriate treatment. But what is happening is we're getting more tools in the toolbox to try based on, good scientific educated guessing on what's best for that patient, and then administering it to them. And so the reason why I am optimistic is because the need is so great. Right? We are not doing enough for this group of patients right now. We need to do better, and I think the FDA recognizes that.
Thank you. I echo both of what you said. And, I think what we've built at Journey Clinical and what we've seen is that we've got about 3,000 practices today that are already practicing psychedelic-assisted therapy in this context of preparation, dosing, and integration. And we've done over 300,000 hours of CAP to date, and one of the big innovations that we've put forward recently is that we were able to deliver our first patient fully insurance-covered, REMS-approved Spravato session in a therapist's office that is not a Journey Clinical site. And I want to take a little moment to weigh the importance of this piece of information, right? A lot of the pushback on accessibility and technology companies and health tech companies being able to deliver these treatments was the difficulties of the REMS that were going to come that may or may not be fully aligned with Spravato. And so we were able to equip an independent practice from start to finish, solving for medical monitoring, storage, insurance coverage, prior authorization, and deliver it. That means that our network of 3,000 providers and growing are ready and are going to be ready day one to deliver these treatments wherever they need to be.
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful, the differences in all of your models, but being able to be prepared for that kind of like a centralized regulatory publication and be able to prepare to do it in a decentralized model that can meet practitioners where they are. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Well, we're going to talk about what it takes to scale without losing integrity in the process. So each of you has taken a complete distinct model to scaling psychedelic care, and maybe you can just take a moment or two to describe what infrastructure readiness actually means in your model specifically, and maybe a little bit about just like what you're working on in terms of readiness right now. Does anyone of you want to kick it off?
I'll start. So, it takes a lot, right? So if we think about it, we need to get patients into care. And that's sort of, patient generation. And that's a sort of two-pronged marketing effort. One is to those referring providers, because we're asking them to break their existing paradigms of care and approach depression in a completely different way. A lot of education comes with that. We also have to do direct consumer advertising. That was one of the things we saw with both TMS and Spravato. It is amazing how many patients only show up in our clinics because they ask their existing provider to refer them. And it shouldn't be that way, but unfortunately it is. The patients have to be empowered to be advocates for their own health care. When they come in, the aperture for portal to entry needs to be as wide as possible. You can't have a complicated Byzantine process of having them come in. These patients are depressed, right? They're already struggling. So asking them to do more to feel better is unfair. So we have to build the system where basically all we need you to do is talk to us for a few minutes and we will do the rest. Right? We will collect your insurance information. We will advocate with the insurance company. We will appeal if we have to appeal for that prior authorization. We will do all the drug delivery, get it stored in the center, and have everything ready to go. And then every time you come in to get treated, we will then bill your insurance company and you don't have to do a thing. The more we ask our patients to do, the less they're actually going to receive that care in the first place. And then on that back end, there's a whole bunch that comes with it. Unfortunately, with depression, it often has a lot of casualties within life. You can't be so insular in the treatment delivery that you don't have the resources to make sure they're plugged in with a bevy of sort of accommodations to help them achieve relief in their life. Like if there's marital discord, if there's substance use issues, if there's other comorbid conditions like anxiety, you have to address that. You have to have the infrastructure to do it. And then, on the back end, we have a team of over 70 people who do nothing but fight with insurance companies. And I'm actually somewhat saddened at the fact that we need that. I'm proud that we actually have it, and we're not going to stop doing that. Finally, what I'll say is the care delivery has to be great, right? Patients are not going to have confidence in the modality if you have a Walmart chair basically strewn out across a hallway and you're like, good luck to you. So what we've built out are private rooms for Spravato, reclining leather chairs, subdued lighting, carpeting, standardized artwork, everything sort of geared towards making sure the patient experience is as pleasant as possible. We have to be careful, and I think this conference has shown that more than anything else. If we sterilize medical care too much, patients will drop out of care altogether.
Yeah, I really appreciated the fact that not only are you creating centralized logistics and really handling a lot of the infrastructure and readiness to lower burden on clients and folks that are coming in for care, but also on the practitioner side of things and really making it much easier for them to just focus on the quality of care in a beautiful way too. Thank you. Steve.
Yeah, so I think as you've heard already, with the two care delivery organizations represented here, Greenbrook and Journey Clinical, they're very different models of care delivery. And we've made references multiple times already to the fact that we all collaborate across different organizations. So a little bit more information about that. What's behind the strategy of working together was the recognition that this is potentially a new paradigm of care delivery, and that there were a lot of questions about what infrastructure would be appropriate and available to deliver that care. And so what we've done is to work with a number, 6 at this point, very high quality mental health care delivery organizations that are intentionally very different. They represent different phenotypes across the continuum of where mental health care is delivered today, to essentially exchange information for us to get a deep understanding of who are the patients they're caring for today, what are the conditions they're being treated for, what are the services that they're receiving, who's involved in delivering that care, how those folks are trained, what are the workflows, what's the patient journey, the economics associated with delivering those treatments. So, and in order from us to them, teaching them about how we are delivering care within our clinical trials today, because it helps us to identify together any potential gaps or barriers that we can start to address now, so that there is that early preparation should there be an approval and a commercial launch.
Yeah, it's going to be so critical to take everything that you've done on the research side and make sure that it smoothly integrates into similar or better quality of care in the real world. All right, Jonathan.
Yeah. That's all. I echo all of what you said, and I think at Journey Clinical there was a lot of similarities to what you're considering, which is essentially the number one thing is ensuring a high standard of care. And the gold standard of care is working with a world-class medical team, working with a licensed mental health professional, which is only what we work with, doing training, preparation, dosing, and integration. And so for us, for example, we are a scaled, venture-backed organization, yet we do a full-hour medical intake. We don't do monthly prescriptions of ketamine. If there is counterindications, we will actually check for clearances from other doctors. They have to come back for a 30-minute follow-up consultation. Our medical team is on call 24/7 during the sessions, so they literally have medical monitoring. We have a whole training continuum. It's 22 modules. It's experiential learning. We offer them peer consultation groups on how to talk to their patients, on different modalities, and you'd actually be surprised. People may think that people are cavalier about this. The therapists aren't cavalier. You actually have to convince them and get them comfortable to doing that, right? And over the 300,000 hours of CAP that we've delivered, we actually just looked at our safety data, and it came out amazingly strong, which was that I think 2% were reported like events that someone was a little agitated before the session and needed to breathe, but 0.08% were reportable events that mostly involved nausea. And so the reason for that is our escalations are very strong. We're very, very focused on quality of care. We also take on all of their medication management if they want. And so we're set up essentially through education, medical support to deliver all these other treatments coming. So, working through what are going to be the next steps for psilocybin and what's the education that they're going to need, and they're eager to do so.
Yeah, I'm really hearing the through line and making sure that the centralized quality of care and taking on the heavy load of making sure that these protocols and SOPs and just like internal pieces are really, really clear and high quality.
Yeah.
I think it's a good example of the title, which is scaling without losing integrity, right?
Yeah. And also getting insurance, right? Like to get insurance coverage, we have to do this properly, have proper notes. And so that's it.
Yeah, not taking the minimum path, but really going for a bit of a higher bar, which I think we all appreciate.
Well, I think, actually, if I could just say one thing. So I think your point about scaling while maintaining integrity is absolutely key, right? Because anytime there's sort of a pioneering treatment, you want to have enough flexibility so that you can have evolution and best practices within that. But we have to be careful that organizations don't step into that space and turn it into factory line care that dilutes out the quality to the point of becoming irrelevant. So I really appreciate your comment that we can't let sort of the efficiency override the quality to the point that the patient suffers.
Completely agree. And I think, and as an example of that, like making sure that there's still a 60-minute appointment, although I'm sure there are very good arguments for shortening that appointment or finding other methods. I think there's got to be some stands taken by the folks that are making these kinds of scaling decisions to decide and determine what is an adequate and high integrity quality of care and making sure that the system is designed around that. So.
Well, also E&M codes can support that, and proper E&M coding. We have a whole RCM department, and we do integrate with AI to work with us. So we're also a technology company, and we are able to make sure that we have the right codes to be able to deliver the right quality of care.
Beautiful. That was a really lovely segue to our next question, so I love that. So I'd like to talk a little bit about common ground and differentiation, because there's clearly some through lines and some collaborations taking place here, but you all clearly offer a very distinct role in post-approval architecture. So maybe you can just share a little bit about what unites your approaches and like where there is commonality and basis for collaboration, but also what specifically distinct pieces you each bring to the table in that. Do you want to start, Jeff?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing I want to say is that we all need to win together. Like this only works if we all succeed. So the notion that we're different or better, that is like, in my opinion, a flawed perspective. We want mass adoption. This 1 in 3 Americans suffering from anxiety and depression is a tremendous population, and we're all looking to do better, and so if we all collaborate, we all win. I think that's the throughput of also quality of care, of thinking together about how each other's systems inform different modalities so that we can all expand access and influence payers, regulators, employers to view this as a valid and reasonable treatment to offer, and not something that's fringe and overcoming stigma. So I think there's a lot of shared throughput there. The other thing that would differentiates us at Journey Clinical and Greenbrook, of course, is we're basically a decentralized behavioral health system that is, essentially offering accessibility to small companies or small practices to be able to deliver this care, and also have them increase their revenue, work with their patients, grow their patient work, expand access in areas where there are no clinics, and offer that as an adjunct to therapy.
One of the things that I appreciate about what you're saying is that it's clearly decentralized and you're empowering individual participants in your network to take on new care and to do that in an empowered way. But also it sounds like there's a good amount of care taken to creating collaborative wedding between the participants so that they're actually learning from each other and cross-supported.
Yes, that's a really important point actually. So like a large part of what we do at Journey and is, primarily our main customer is a therapist. We're also expanding now to patients as well, of course. Not that they're not our customer, but we're starting to bring patients to therapists. But community is a big deal. And it's pretty amazing to see that people need to learn in community, learn in peer groups. And so we have like a whole Facebook interface. I have my community team right in front of me who do awesome work. And we did an event yesterday or 2 days ago where they come together, they actually meet up, they learn different group cap modalities or couples cap modalities. And that dynamic, aside from being an obvious flywheel for growth, is also a flywheel for people who are maybe hesitant or new or want to get educated and get reaffirmed by seeing people just like them, posting successful stories. And my favorite thing in the world, we've got a channel in our interface called Client Wins. And it's just like, if I'm ever depressed, I just go and read it. And it's like, it says like, there's one of them said, rest in peace depression, a new lease on life. Like, it's just amazing. And there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these. And so, I think that's also a way of showing that we're not doing something weird. We're not just doing some psychedelic thing. We're delivering a standard of care that is helping millions of people. And I think that community is a big, big piece of that.
Yeah, bringing the heart in and helping people see the magic of each other's work. Yeah, I love that. What about you, Jeff?
So let's start with what's a little different. So I think Greenbrook has more of a traditional medical model, right? So we have 140 providers, mostly psychiatrists, a handful of nurse practitioners, psychiatric nurse practitioners, and it is centralized instead of decentralized. And there's pluses and minuses to that, right? So, one of the advantages is you can take the best practice from any center and then extrapolate that out to all the other centers. So if you walk into one Greenbrook clinic in Maryland, for example, it's going to look like and have the same furniture and have the same staffing models and the same layout as a center in California. And what we do is every time we kind of say, hey, this really worked well, let's do it everywhere, we kind of do that. There's a little bit of flexibility locally, but we want to make sure that we're always moving forward. In addition, I think, kind of like Jonathan said, we actually have what's called a clinical advisory committee. So our most experienced doctors sort of stay on call all the time for any provider. They can email us or call us and say, hey, I got this really complicated case. What would you recommend doing? And so, every provider is as good as our best providers. And I actually like that sort of, leveraging of assets. I'm a big fan of choice. And so, getting into I agree there's enough space here for everyone. Because when I was in the Army, there was no choice, right? You showed up and you got whoever you got. And I kind of didn't like that much. We actually have to compete within the marketplace to provide a good service to our patients. Otherwise, they're not going to come see us. I like that. That keeps us really, really honest. And think about this. 2.7% of people who might benefit from Spravato have ever even been offered it. We are not going to have an issue with too many providers. We are going to have an issue of not enough patients having access to the care. And that's going to be because we have too few providers, too little insurance coverage. So I like the decentralized model. I like the centralized model. And I like the idea that patients can choose which they want. All right? But where we have to fight together and where we have this common battle is making sure patients have a choice in the first place.
I love that.
And I really appreciate appreciate the fact that you are collaborating and sharing lessons learned, because to your point, I mean, there's a lot of power behind making sure that what's working and surfacing in a particular location or from any one of your practitioners is understood and then extrapolated and shared across the wider network, so it becomes a bit of a learning machine. So I appreciate that, and then there's a version of that happening here, with the learning machine sharing across the different models and approaches, and making sure that we're really being kept flexible and absorbing what works best in terms of ultimate care. Awesome. Over to you, Steve.
Well said, all of you. And I will pluck the phrase different roles out of your original question, because certainly at Compass we have a very different role than a healthcare provider organization. We are right now conducting research and development. We are drug developers, one designated a manufacturer and distributor. We do not deliver healthcare. Right? So I like to say that we are making donuts, plain donuts, and hopefully at one point we will have the opportunity to make those available, but it would be you all that put the sprinkles on top or glaze them or fill them with jelly, that you will design the package around it, the care delivery that brings these to patients. So our role is to, first of all, demonstrate a risk-benefit profile that enables an agency like the FDA to approve the product. We also have a responsibility to make sure that healthcare providers are educated about that product, that they understand its profile, that there are some parameters for its safe delivery, and that would be things like REMS. For those that aren't familiar with REMS, it's an acronym that stands for Risk Evaluation and Mitigation Strategy. It's a tool that the FDA has that's often used with new classes of drugs or others where there may be some ongoing questions about potential risks with the product that need to be tracked over time. Spravato has a REMS. One of the more familiar REMS in the mental health community is clozapine, which is an antipsychotic. We will almost definitely have a REMS for COMP360 if approved, and that will set up some basic guardrails for its delivery and for the tracking, again, of certain identified risks. But it will leave open a lot of latitude and flexibility for healthcare providers to decide how to bring that to patients. And I think, so again, going back to the beginning, we have very different roles in that, but it's a continuum, and none of us get to do the thing that we focus on unless everyone else is working together.
And I love the fact that it could, beyond providing clarity and protocol and direction, like I've witnessed and experienced between all of you, like a true collaborative exchange and a discussion around how to ease those transitions and how to make sure that that information is passed on and discussed and understood in the way that it's going to be maximally and optimally used in the real world and in care delivery. So I just have a little bit of love for the fact that this is actually working in the real world and that y'all are exemplifying that. So
there's a lot of love here.
I know it. Awesome. Well, that was a great segue also, Steve, to the next area, which is really around guardrails, like to speak to REMS, right? So guardrails and ethical boundaries as a part of integrity in service delivery. So as this field is scaling so quickly, where do each of you see the greatest risks to safety and equity, and what are you doing to mitigate them? So if we can try to be a little specific here, I know it's a broad question. Anyone of you feel inspired to kick out?
I'll jump.
Yeah.
So I think there's a couple of things that I personally see. What Compass Pathways is trying to do is demonstrate a specific way of administering psilocybin such that it proves that it is efficacious and safe. And we need to be able to offer that to patients in a way that was proven to be effective rather than conjecture of what we think might be effective, in my opinion, if it's going to be medicalized. What will be tragic, and one of the risks is that the constraints for access to care are so rigid that patients divert off to I'll say the kind of gray market, if you will, depending on your location in the US. Because the way that is delivered doesn't have those guardrails in place to make sure that it's following the safety and efficacy that was proven in the first place. So if we make it too hard for people to come, they will go elsewhere because the need is so great. I also think that we have to be very reverent towards the idea of specifically psychedelics and psilocybin. Patients, after administration of that compound or medication, can be left in a state where they are vulnerable. And they are vulnerable to the sitter, supervisor, therapist, whatever, attendant, whatever we want to call that person. And, you know, unfortunately, we found out in the 1960s that that vulnerability led to patient harm. So what we are doing, for example, is we have in our clinics a non-recording, centralized video feed system. Every patient being treated, even if there's a face-to-face person in that room, has a backup person watching them to make sure everything is okay. And we have another full-time, licensed, independent practitioner on site if there is a medical emergency at that time. That redundancy of oversight adds additional protections to that patient. And then finally, it's the risk of medication diversion. Anytime you are holding on to or managing a controlled substance, there is a risk that that will leave the center. And that will be devastating for a whole bunch of reasons. That can shut down a clinic, it can lead to criminal charges, and ultimately the patient's expecting to get treated with that compound. So you need the provisions in place, and quite literally it's like locks and keys, inventory systems, medical logs, and all those things. The nice thing about Spravato is we've had to build a lot of that now, but I think in particular because of the sensitivity of psilocybin, the longer period of intoxication that comes with that, we need to amplify those systems a little bit just to make sure we continue with that idea of safety.
Awesome. Jonathan?
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, I may push back a little bit on the 60s and the clinicians being the problem. I think that the 60s led to a lot of interesting and unfortunately not super productive outcomes on perception of how psychedelics were used. But what we've done, so there's a few guardrails, right? First of all, we work in collaboration with the patient. So that means that we will only prescribe if a patient is matched with a licensed mental health professional who's gone through our training and who's ready to be delivering these treatments. Then they have to, and we only prescribe for 2 sessions, we don't do monthly memberships. Then they have to come, the therapists have to log those sessions in the portal, take the blood pressure, we need to know what went on, and then they have to come back for a 30-minute evaluation for us to prescribe again. We also take on all of their meds, right? So we're having a holistic perspective on their view. And another guardrail is that they report on how the therapy is going to a medical professional that works for a journey. So I think that's one piece of sort of like essentially medical monitoring that's happening remotely where we guardrail. Of course, in the case of Spravato, it's not remote. We send someone from our medical team that's present there. So there is another layer there as well. The other part is training. We force them to go through a whole protocol that they receive CE credits for. They go through experiential learning, which can be shadowing of other sessions. I mean, there's essentially I forget the word, what's it called? Let me see, it's a whole program, and there is a specific word for it. It will come back to me. The training is very, very extensive, right? And again, I would stress that these are not cavalier people. The other part is, storage and monitoring. We've solved that for them, and we will be able to solve that problem and integrate more protocols. So I think, when we look at our efficacy results, we've had, about 87% of our patients have improved outcomes. I think that when you drop off the treatment, like continuity of treatment is important because there's a 30% increase if they do the whole 8 sessions, for example. And 40% of those patients are actually fully recovered and have full remission of their symptoms. So I think continuing to monitor that, reporting, tracking the outcomes, medical monitoring, embedding technology and training is the way to go.
Yeah, I really hear like a shared commitment to different methods to like high quality controls and degrees of oversight, whether it's in, having case review and community peer evaluation or just, direct visibility with the patient to understand what's going on from their lens, or whether it's really having like enforceable protocols and making sure that there is, action being taken across sites to make sure that there aren't being corners cut, that we're not seeing dispersion or any other issues on the ground.
And then maybe just one thing, sort of like psilocybin is 8 hours in the clinical trials, but realistically in those 8 hours, I mean, Steve, you can talk to that way better than I can. But it's actually like there's a part of it where they're doing preparation and they're coming and they're sitting. And so when we, during CAP, They're actually doing preparation sessions, they're getting ready, there's a protocol, they're staying on site for the time where they're intoxicated, someone's picking them up after. So the reality of what a psilocybin session will look like versus what it looks like in a clinical trial might be slightly different. And there's probably like flexibility for that to be, it's not necessary. Not that I'm saying that they should just go home when they're intoxicated, but will it really be like full 8 hours where someone needs to be there? Probably not. Probably they're going to be able to start preparing a little bit before and making that supported with someone who's there to bring them back. But yeah, the camp sessions are not always too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great, to pass it over to you, Steve. I mean, how are you thinking about some immediate safety challenges and just building flexibility or where there needs to be consistency in model care?
Yeah, maybe starting with the length of that administration session, just as one illustrative point, and then I can broaden out a bit. But yes, to your point, Jonathan, in our clinical trials right now, that administration day is 6 to 8 hours long. Tends to skew more towards 6 than 8, but we typically talk about it as 6 to 8. As many may be aware, a typical psilocybin experience, at least the more intense portion of that, tends not to be that long. It's more like 3 to 4 hours. There's some lagged onset, there's a tail at the end. If we take the existing example of Spravato, which also has in-office administration and it's dissociative, within that REMS, there's a requirement of a 2-hour period of observation after somebody self-administers the nasal spray. We will draft a REMS. We already have a draft one of that. That will be something that we will propose to FDA with our NDA submission. It will ultimately be negotiated with FDA. And it's unclear at this point whether it will specify a certain number of hours that people will need to remain in the office, or will there'll be some discretion clinically for when somebody is safe to leave. It's probably important to recognize that there are many examples across medicine already where people are discharged as long as they have somebody driving them home, where they may not be ready to operate heavy machinery. With acute care visits within emergency departments, or being discharged from hospitals post-op, dental procedures, etc. We've all seen all those videos online of kids on ketamine after getting stitched up, etc. It's no laughing matter, but my point is that I think we've had a fairly rigid standard to now that's really sort of exceptional for psychiatry, different than other fields of medicine, around what is an appropriate condition for somebody to be discharged. And to Jeff's point, and again, this will ultimately be a negotiation, but we don't want to set up overly onerous barriers such that it drives people to potentially less safe practice. I'm droning on one more thing here, but I do think that ketamine to Spravato's story is also a good illustration, because at this point, having in the 2010s treated many thousands of people with ketamine, and then seeing how that's evolved over time, I feel fairly ambivalent at this point, as there's some pretty wild practice out there, and there's a lot of opportunity for that because it's a pretty cheap drug, and it's off-label, and it's bypassing the insurance system, and so there's a lot of opportunity for unscrupulous people to do whatever they want. Within what we saw with Spravato is that with an on-label product that has a REMS, that has some other restrictions around it, it really does limit the potential for some of those potentially concerning safety outcomes. And we need to find, I think, the right point in the tension between appropriate guardrails with still enough latitude for clinical decision-making without putting undue barriers in place that would restrict patient access.
Yeah, beautiful. And I mean, we are approaching the end of our time. So I'm going to do a couple rapid fire closers. I'm going to try to strike up our responses.
Maybe just one thing to add is that with psilocybin, with Spravato, with ketamine, the integration process is the after, there's the dosing, but there's also the psychological support after. And having that proper infrastructure in place, I think is really important. And so making sure that we're all doing it in our own different capacity is really an important guardrail for proper care and avoiding people feeling worse after, because it can happen.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Sometimes it gets worse before it gets better.
Yeah, people have a range of drugs. Well, great. Maybe on the tension, sort of ending note that you left there, I'd like to just have a quick, brief response about how we make sure that we're balancing financial sustainability with access and avoiding, a universe and a reality where only the wealthy or elite are really getting access to these services. So maybe if each of you could just say a sentence or two about what you're doing to help address that, that would be wonderful. Maybe we'll start with you, Stephen. Work this way.
Yeah, a couple things I'll mention. I mean, this is where I spend a lot of time, so I could spend a lot of time answering this, but just to pick on a couple of things. Number one, going back to the strategic collaborations that we have with this stage and with others, very proud that our most recent announcement was a collaboration with a certified community behavioral health clinic called HealthPort, which is based in Maryland. And for those that aren't familiar with that CCBHC model, it specifically serves the underserved. Those who have Medicaid or underinsured or uninsured. And it is part of an effort to make sure that we are building for equitable access. Another thing is one of the early challenges with implementation of Spravato was the reimbursement system. There wasn't a CPT code in place that described that required 2 hours of observation in the office. And so that's why a few years ago, we partnered with Lycos on submitting an application to AMA for new CPT codes, the codes that are used by healthcare providers to submit for reimbursement for their services that are specific to the administration of psychedelic treatments. So we wanted to ensure that that reimbursement framework was in place early.
Beautiful.
I'll be super fast because I know we're 30 seconds over. So, listen, Greenbrook's going to do its marketing. We have our sales team that goes out and talks with providers. But here is my ask of you all. You all are ambassadors in this fight to get this treatment available to patients who need it. None of us can do it without your help. So what I would say is, shout from the mountaintops. Let your legislators know. Talk with your insurance companies. Let your friends and family know. This is a very, very important, watershed moment within psychiatry. And what direction things flow is dependent not only on what we do up here, but what you all do out there. So thank you for being here today and for listening to us, and I appreciate all that you do.
Sure, I can just tell real quick.
Yeah.
So I think insurance coverage is the number one thing. That's why we took it.
Yes.
Then the other part is making sure we work with BIPOC populations and underserved population. We offer sliding scales. We work with veterans. But I'm echoing exactly the same thing. Bring the dialogue to the world that this is a valid treatment that is done in a therapeutic context. It's not something that's fringe. And bringing that and changing that discourse and perception is the power that you have, and we need your help to bring these treatments at scale to everybody. So thank you.
Well, I love the call to action. I'd really like to just say thank you all for attending. I hope you really appreciated a grounded, real-world-based conversation about the models that are being developed right now to anticipate and be ready for this quality, responsible care as it hits the universe. So thank you all for being here.